I've always wondered how people would think that 9/11 was an inside job. There are so many supporting facts that disembowel the fact that 9/11 was indeed done at the hands of terrorists. It is well known that the United States found a plethora of proof that showed it was done by members of Al-Qaeda. It is known that they picked the flights based on how much fuel the aircrafts had in order to apply maximum damage. One final reason that suspecting 9/11 was not an inside job would be that if someone were to plan a conspiracy theory of this magnitude, the likelihood of it staying a complete secret is next to none, as someone would have found out about it.
Okay.
Bush set up 9/11 to exploit fear into the American citizens for profit and support for his campaign election. He wanted the oil profits from the Middle East and had connections with bin Laden's family. According to the Washington Post, the Carlyle Group met at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in New York City one day before 9/11. In attendance at this meeting was former President George W. Bush and Shafiq bin Laden, the brother of Osama bin Laden. And then another reason why I would say that the 9/11 was an inside job is because Building 7, a 47-story steel frame building, which was completely untouched by hijacked planes, imploded at the exact manner of a professionally engineered demolition, a near free fall speed, straight down with a scientific precision to put the building into a pile of rubble, barely damaging any other buildings around it.
All right.
Okay.
So, the first point that I have for how 9/11 was not an inside job is there was a confession tape with bin Laden admitting that he was behind it. When you have a video showing the leader of Al-Qaeda taking responsibility, it becomes hard to argue that 9/11 attacks were an inside job because terrorist groups are known to accept and say that they did an attack. So bin Laden saying that he did it should be enough proof on its own that it was a terrorist attack.
And the government is not that corrupt. A numerous amount of people think that there's some corruption in the government, which may be true. However, there's no way that the government would continue on to something as tragic as 9/11. The government would not carry through to kill their own citizens, and it would end up going to cost them billions in damages, and I don't think they would carry through with something of that magnitude.
Our other point is, again, a conspiracy of that size would have been found out by somebody on the outside. The chances of conspiracy of this size staying quiet is next to none. Someone on the outside would have found out, and they would have been able to warn the people in that area.
And there's no actual hard proof evidence supporting the fact that 9/11 was in fact an inside job. Something like this would surely have more evidence supporting the idea that the attacks were in fact planned by the government.
Okay, back to you guys for your 4 points.
The other building that got hit was the Pentagon. How can you explain that big of a plane hitting a building and just evaporating? Like, they said that the jet fuel melt the steel beams of the plane and all that, but they also said that the way that they identified the bodies was by fingerprints. What kind of jet fuel incinerates steel, but you can still get fingerprints from the rubble? And through the 1,500 photos found in that were taken of the plane crash at the Pentagon, and all the photos that were analyzed, there was not a single seat cushion. There was not a single. There wasn't a single seat cushion. There wasn't a. And there were no pieces of desks or tables or anything found in any of the photos. There was just rubble. It was literally covered up.
but yet they could still find one of the passports that was allegedly placed in the rubble that was from one of the hijackers on the plane. That is actually still alive today. Weird, huh?
So how can a plane crash and everybody die except the guy that was in the front of the plane? And how can steel beams and bodies get burned up, but a book not even untouched, like barely any marks on it? The one plane that hit the tower, when planes hit stuff, like if a plane hit the tower, yes, it is supposed to fall, but not straight down. At least some of the buildings should have stayed up. Those buildings are made.
Reporters from several news stations quoted that they've heard several bombs going off inside the building at the time after the plane hit the building, in the bottom of the building. There's actually videos of it. You can see kind of the explosion of where it's happening too. In which case, because the building's not just going to go down in pancake form when a plane hits near the top of the building. It's got to have some explosion going down at the bottom for it to go down in that straight demolition form.
Some of the building should have stayed up if there were no bombs. And
some people will argue that Building 7 got blown up and taken down by just the intense heat of the whole incident. But how would that be possible with the two other buildings, the United States Post Office right next door, and the Visions Electronics store right next door to that one? None of those buildings were even damaged at all, but yet that building managed to fully get demolished. How?
And those buildings are supposed to withstand earthquakes and huge tremors. How can a plane just hit it and it fall straight down? Not to one side, not to the other side, but straight down. And those were for
Okay. Ash, go ahead.
Like what?
So with the planes that got hijacked, they got hijacked in United States military airspace. Within seconds, planes that take off in the United States, they have to follow fixed points on a flight path. If they miss one of those points, they try to contact the pilot. If the contact with the pilot fails, they send out a fighter jet, F-18 fighter jets, to go out and investigate it. How did not one single military fighter jet go out to any of these supposedly hijacked planes when this whole incident happened? It could have been easily prevented if it was.
To that point, it wasn't up until after 9/11 that NORAD would send out planes to search for planes that were possibly.
NORAD, that was under the influence of Dick Cheney at the time, right? The corrupt politician. Where are you going to start going on about the Patriot Act 2 and how that was written? And well, that was actually written before 9/11 happened, but then later brought into law in October 26th. After, weird how they already had it written out beforehand, but then not decided to actually put it into place until after the whole incident happened.
One thing would be that even if they would have sent fighter jets up right away, the chances of them finding the planes fast enough would also be slim, because it's not that difficult to turn off a transponder in a plane, and then no one can track where that plane is. So they would have had to magically find the planes in time to stop them, and even then, are you still just going to blow up a plane?
They say they don't. So you're saying they didn't have any GPS on the planes at all? They had no location of it.
No, they had no idea where the planes were because the transponders were turned off.
Explain how 7 of the declared hijackers are still alive today from the September 11th flight hijackings. And I know which flights they were on. Flight 11 had Waleed M. Al-Shir, he's alive. Wael M. Ashir, he's also alive. Abdulaziz Alamar, is alive as well. And on Flight 175, Mohammed Ashiri is alive. Flight 77, Salim Al-Sami is alive. And Flight 93, Saeed Al-Ghamidi is alive. And then also Ahmed Al-Nami is also alive on those flights. Those were all the flights that they said were hijacked and flew into the planes. How are those people still alive if they were on those planes, hijacking them, flying them into a building? And none of those have any flight training at all. None of them have history of being a pilot. How can they maneuver that? There has to be an experienced, the flight path that they took and flew into the buildings was from an experienced pilot that was able to maneuver through the buildings.
Just because they don't have history of being a pilot doesn't mean that they could still be trained before
It
they
should also mean that there's dead too, right?
And how can you explain the plane hitting the Pentagon, but there was not a single scratch on the lawn? And how can you explain the Minister of Defense going out onto the grass right after the plane hit the building while he still knew that there was a plane still in the air headed towards the Twin Towers, just for the photo op? Why would you rush out onto the grass when you still know that there's another imminent threat towards the building? Why don't you just do everything in your power to stop that?
And back to the Osama bin Laden confession tapes. I don't know if you did any extra research behind that, what happened before that, but he's got several quotes from Osama bin Laden, because when they were trying to get him to confess beforehand without being on videotape, he denied it fully more than 3 times. Denied that he had no involvement of it, and that was strictly forbidden by his leaders.
And as soon as the tape aired, he came out and spoke and said he had nothing to do with that, that he did not admit to 9/11 or anything like that.
And the way I see it is that the United States was looking for a reason to go to war, and they wanted the oil from the Middle East. And what better way to do it than have them frame an attack from people that they want to go get the oil from?
I had also seen in some of the tapes that Osama had previously been seen, spotted with the hijackers in preparation for the attacks. So there's some film on him, I believe, with all a few of the accused hijackers.
When you're ready.
I would like to once again reinforce the idea of how illogical 9/11 being an inside job sounds. As previously stated, the film with bin Laden helped, I believe, prove that it was in fact partially terrorism, nonetheless. Bin Laden said, "We are free and we want to regain freedom for our nation." Videos also show Osama with the hijackers, 2 of them, as they made preparations for the attacks. These should be seen as pretty substantial evidence in proving that the attacks were in fact done by terrorists. Surely by now we also would have received more evidence of government involvement if that were in fact the case. It wouldn't have remained a secret for this long, and surely more word would have been out about it by now. The government would never have done something to do with one of the darkest days in American history.
Yeah, government, they're all just the best people, right?
Are you guys done?
That's it.
Okay, before Cash interrupted, go ahead. You guys have the last word now. Last word from this side.
There's a whole matrix of information pointing to the United States government's involvement in planning and the execution of September 11th, expanding from the so-called intelligence breakdown and the lack of military response to the bizarre collapse of the World Trade Center 7, to the utmost amazing aeronautical maneuvering of the hijacked planes, to Dick Cheney's suspicious behavior in the underground bunkers. The list goes on and on. The only thing keeping the truth about 9/11 from emerging is our collective desire to continue to spin the fairy tale we have all been fed